My name is Jenna Rains, and 3 weeks ago, I buried my husband with one hand and held my children with the other. I thought returning to my parents' home would offer comfort, but instead, I saw my sisters glare and felt the air shift with unspoken rules. But what I learned later changed everything. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and I'm starting a story about a journey through a nightmare. San Antonio had never felt so cruel. The sun glared too brightly for a funeral. Texas heat stuck to my black dress like a second skin. I held Eli's small hand in mine, his palm warm and damp, while Annie clung to my hip, her soft whimper muffled by my shoulder. I should have been stronger, but my knees trembled as I approached the gravesite. People whispered behind me. Most didn't know what to say. The ones who did said all the wrong things. He's in a better place now. At least he's not in pain. You're so young, you'll find love again. As if I'd misplaced a necklace. As if grief came with a gift receipt. Mom stood beside me, her hand resting gently on my back. Dad kept his eyes hidden behind sunglasses. He was a quiet man, but I felt something like resolve in his presence. A silent, unspoken offer. A shield. Then I saw her. Ashley. My sister stood 3 rows behind, dressed in designer black with her baby bump barely visible beneath her perfectly belted coat. Her lips were glossed, her eyes untouched by grief. She made a show of dabbing her cheek with a tissue, though I'm not sure a single tear had fallen. And when Mom leaned down and whispered, "You and the kids should come stay with us for a while," Ashley rolled her eyes, just slightly, but I saw it. That tiny flicker of disdain, as if the words "you and the kids" tasted sour in her mouth. Annie didn't notice. She was busy pointing out butterflies to her brother, her small voice chirping, "Look, Eli, that one has purple wings." It broke something in me to hear joy in her tone, pure and untouched by death. Eli nodded solemnly. At 5, he seemed to understand the weight of the day far better than a child should. I smiled weakly at them. "Grandma's house has a garden," I said, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. "You'll both love it there." Annie beamed. "Will we sleep in Mommy's old room?" Mom nodded. "Of course, sweetheart, it's all yours." Ashley huffed just audibly enough for me to hear. I didn't react. I couldn't. Not today. Today was for Evan. For saying goodbye to the man who held my hand through high school, who built bunk beds when I was 8 months pregnant, who used to bring me coffee just the way I liked it even after 12-hour shifts. The man who, just 6 months ago, was smiling through chemo like he could still beat it. The man I'd loved for 19 years. I looked up and saw Ashley whispering to her fiancé, Daniel, some new tech guy she'd met on a cruise last year. He didn't belong here, and he knew it. He shifted uncomfortably, his arm brushing hers, but she didn't notice. Maybe I was being unfair. Maybe grief had made me paranoid. But that eye roll, it wasn't a fluke. It was a reminder of everything. Of the way Ashley used to call me the clingy one. Of how she told people I settled too young. Of how she once said, "Well, Jenna's kids are cute, but I could never give up my career like that." I blinked back the sting and turned my gaze to the preacher. He said some kind words about Evan's courage, his faith, his loyalty. I half listened. My mind was tangled in memories, Evan building a treehouse in the backyard even while coughing blood. Evan whispering, "I just want you and the kids to be okay," while I pretended not to cry. The service ended. People began to drift away. Friends placed flowers, nodded politely, avoided eye contact. Then it was just us. Mom, Dad, Ashley, Daniel, and the 3 of us. Me, Eli, and Annie. Ashley broke the silence first. "So when are you planning to move in? I mean, just so we can rearrange the guest room." I stared at her. "Mom said I'd be in my old room." Ashley blinked slowly, then smiled like she hadn't just undercut our mother. "Oh, right, I forgot. Well, I'm sure we'll figure it out." She was already planting flags, setting the tone, making it clear that we weren't coming home, we were intruding. Mom changed the subject. "I'll make dinner tonight, comfort food. Jenna, you always loved my shepherd's pie." I nodded, swallowing a lump. I didn't want food. I wanted Evan. I wanted my children to have their father. I wanted to scream. But instead, I smiled. Because when you've lost everything, you cling to scraps of kindness like they're life rafts. We drove home in silence, Eli clutching a toy car Evan had given him on his last birthday, Annie asleep in her booster seat. My parents' house looked the same. White brick, green shutters, the swing still hanging from the front porch. But as we pulled into the driveway, Ashley was already inside. Lights on, music playing softly. Her coat hung neatly by the door. It wasn't a homecoming. It was a beginning, but of what I didn't yet know. The first few weeks blurred into each other like soft brushstrokes, quiet mornings, small victories, and the slow, careful rebuilding of something that almost resembled peace. Mom insisted on making hot breakfast every morning. Real breakfast, not the kind of rushed chaos I'd gotten used to in those final months. Eli loved the pancakes shaped like bears, and Annie liked that Grandma let her pour her own syrup. There was a gentle rhythm to it all, like slipping into a forgotten melody. I was careful not to disturb the flow. I didn't bring up Evan, not unless the kids asked. And even then, I kept it light. Daddy loved pancakes too, or he'd be so proud of your drawings. I saved the harder memories for the nights I couldn't sleep. During the day, I cleaned. I cleaned the garage, not just the clutter, but the years. I found old photo albums, Dad's camping gear, a rusted bike that still had my name on the frame. At first, it was just to make room for our things, but soon it became therapy. Wiping down dusty shelves gave me a sense of control. Reorganizing boxes made space not just in the garage, but in me. Mom offered to help once, but I gently declined. "It's easier if I just focus," I said. She seemed relieved. I think she was grateful not to deal with it. Ashley was mostly absent. She'd visit, float through the kitchen with her designer tote and a stream of complaints about swollen ankles and Braxton Hicks contractions. I offered a polite smile and stepped aside. "This pregnancy's been brutal," she said one afternoon, reaching into the fridge and ignoring my kids entirely. "I swear if one more person tells me to enjoy the glow, I'm going to scream." Mom fussed over her, pulling out a stool. Sit, sweetheart. Jenna, could you grab her the lemon water?" I did, quietly. I'd learned how to shrink myself in these moments. It wasn't defeat, it was survival. But outside of those blips, things were okay. Evenings were my favorite. Annie would curl into my lap with her pink blanket while Eli, always curious, would sit beside Grandpa in the den asking questions about every tool in the garage. Dad wasn't the warmest man, but he tried with Eli. And that counted for something. One night while we folded laundry together, Mom looked at me and said, "You seem more like yourself." I smiled. I think I'd forgotten what that felt like. She reached out, touching my cheek with that familiar motherly gentleness. "You're doing so well, Jenna. The kids are happy, that's all that matters." For a brief second, I believed her. We were still sleeping in my childhood bedroom, the same floral wallpaper, the same creaky bed. I kept a photo of Evan tucked into the mirror frame, him holding Annie in the hospital, exhaustion and joy on his face. I didn't look at it often, just enough to remember. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat alone on that bed and finally allowed the silence to speak. The truth was, coming here had saved me. 6 months of hospitals, of watching a man waste away, of trying to keep up with the bills, the treatments, the childcare, and the pretending. Pretending I was okay. Pretending I could still believe in happy endings. I hadn't slept a full night in almost a year before I came here. But here I could rest. I could breathe. I whispered to Evan's photo, "They're safe." I kept my promise. And I meant it. That weekend, Mom pulled out an old family puzzle and invited the kids to help her at the dining table. I watched from the kitchen, sipping lukewarm tea, as Eli showed off his puzzle face, tongue sticking out, brows furrowed. Annie kept trying to fit sky pieces into the corners, convinced they were too pretty to hide. It was one of those slow, glowing moments, the kind where the world feels mercifully still. I leaned against the doorway and closed my eyes, letting the sounds of laughter fill the house. It felt like maybe, just maybe, life was beginning again. But even then, I should have noticed. How Ashley never looked at my children when they spoke. How Mom always shushed them quicker than she ever had her grandnephews. How Dad sighed, barely, subtly, when Annie spilled juice on the floor. I was so busy being grateful for the warmth, I missed the first signs of the chill. It was a Tuesday evening when the laughter faded too fast. The kids had fallen asleep early. Annie curled sideways across the bed like a kitten, Eli breathing softly into his pillow, his toy fire truck nestled under one arm. I had no more chores to finish, no reason to keep busy, and no one to talk to who didn't expect a smile in return. So I sat on the edge of the bed and let stillness crawl in. I don't know what made me open the drawer. Maybe I was looking for a journal, Or maybe I needed to touch something that belonged only to me. Instead, I found the hospital bracelet. It had been tucked inside the bag I carried everywhere last year, just in case Evan called from the ER again, just in case I needed to rush. I stared at the plastic band, faded now, but his name still clear. Evan Rains, DOB, 11/22/85. I hadn't cried in weeks. I told everyone I was coping, that the kids were my priority, that I was too tired for tears. But that night, I couldn't pretend anymore. I curled my knees up, clutching the bracelet like it could answer questions I was too afraid to ask. My face stayed dry for a long time, as if my own body was trying to resist the flood. But it broke, silently, suddenly. It wasn't a wail. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet collapse. Because grief doesn't always come like thunder. Sometimes it whispers. Was it all for nothing? I remembered the bills. The endless phone calls with insurance agents who treated me like a nuisance. The second mortgage Evan begged me not to take. I don't want you stuck cleaning up after this, he'd said, smiling like that could make the cancer hurt less. I took the loan anyway. And now, what was left? A shoebox full of sympathy cards, 2 confused children, and a woman sitting in her childhood bedroom clutching a piece of plastic like it was a life raft. The nights in the hospital were the worst. Evan always tried to joke, even when he could barely keep food down. Next time we take a vacation, remind me to pick somewhere with less beeping. I laughed then. I always laughed, because if I didn't, I'd break. And if I broke, who would keep everything together? I kept remembering the last night. I'd stepped out to grab coffee from the vending machine. When I came back, he was gone, just gone, no warning, no final words. They said it was peaceful, but how would they know? They weren't there. I'd missed it by 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I whispered that number into the dark like it was some sacred, unsolvable riddle. The walls around me, the floral wallpaper, the neat bookshelves, the trophy from 3rd grade spelling bee, all mocked the woman I used to be. I was 36 and felt like 80. I had lived 1,000 lives in the last year, wife, nurse, counselor, financial magician, single mother. But in that moment, I was just a girl, alone, lost, wondering if the weight would ever ease. From the next room, I heard Eli mumble in his sleep, something about a dragon and a blue truck. Annie stirred and rolled closer to the wall. They didn't know. They still talked about Daddy like he was at work, like he might walk through the door next week and say, "Sorry I'm late, what did I miss?" And I let them, because their belief was beautiful, and maybe some part of me needed it too. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the window and stared out at the empty backyard. The same yard Evan once mowed on our visits, sweaty and smiling while Dad teased him about doing it all wrong. Funny how I remembered that now. I'd forgotten Evan's voice. Not the sound, but the timbre. The way it dipped when he was serious. The laugh he reserved just for me. Those things were fading, and that terrified me more than anything. Because if his voice vanished, what else would go? I reached under the bed and pulled out the photo album I'd hidden the week we arrived. I wasn't ready then. I wasn't sure I'd ever be. But I needed to see him. The first photo was us at 18, me with a pixie cut, Evan in a hoodie with a goofy grin holding a sparkler on the 4th of July. We looked invincible. We had no idea. Page after page, our wedding, the birth of Eli, that ridiculous family costume Halloween when Evan dressed as a giant pumpkin just to make Annie laugh. I touched the images like they could feel it, like he might reach back. And finally, I said it aloud. "I don't know if I can do this without you." The words hung in the room like a confession, because the truth was I wasn't okay. I was surviving, performing, keeping everyone fed, clean, and distracted. But I missed my partner, the one who knew the look Annie gave before she fibbed, the one who always remembered to fill up the car before I even noticed it was low, the one who knew how to hold me without fixing anything. Now there was no one, only this house, this room, this silence. I closed the album, placed the bracelet back in the drawer, and wiped my face. Tomorrow I'd make oatmeal and pack lunch boxes. I'd laugh at Annie's jokes and pretend not to worry when Eli stared too long at the floor. But tonight I let it all fall. And somehow I think Evan would have been proud. Ashley went into labor on a Thursday morning. Mom rushed into the kitchen just as I'd finished packing Eli's lunch. "She's having contractions 5 minutes apart. I'm going with her to the hospital." I blinked. "Should I come too?" "No need," she said, already grabbing her purse. "Daniel's meeting her there. You've got the kids to think about." She was out the door before I could reply. Eli sat at the table, poking at his cereal. "Is Aunt Ashley's baby coming?" "Looks like it," I said softly. He nodded, uninterested. Do we still get pancakes tomorrow? I smiled. Absolutely. That afternoon, I helped Annie glue googly eyes to construction paper while Eli practiced drawing rocket ships. For a moment, I forgot we were even in someone else's home. It felt like hours again, messy and loud and real. Then Mom called. She's here, she shouted over the sound of beeping machines. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, beautiful little girl. Ashley wants to name her Emery. I hesitated. That's a pretty name. She's exhausted, Mom continued. But over the moon, I told her we'd take care of everything here so she can rest. By we, I assumed she meant me. Still, I didn't mind. New babies were magic, right? At least, they're supposed to be. Ashley came home 2 days later, cradled in compliments and lavender throw pillows. Emery was perfect, tiny fists, peach fuzz hair, and impossibly soft yawn. For the first 24 hours, everything was sweet chaos. Neighbors dropped off meals. Aunt Leela came by with a box of newborn onesies. Daniel showed off the baby like a trophy at a corporate retreat. I kept my distance, giving Ashley the spotlight she clearly expected. She was glowing not from joy but from control. On day 3, things changed. I just finished reheating lunch when I heard Ashley's voice from down the hall. Jenna, she called too brightly. Can you help with something? I walked into the nursery. Ashley sat on the rocker, Emery on her chest, hair in a silk wrap. I need you to take the overnight shifts this week just while I recover. I blinked. Overnight? Yes, Mom said you'd understand. You're not working full time and you owe us, don't you? My mouth opened, then closed. Owe you? Ashley adjusted Emery's blanket. You've been living here for free for how long now? I think it's fair. Free, I swallowed hard. I didn't realize you were keeping score. She looked up at me with a faux sympathetic smile. Come on, Jenna, you know how exhausted I am. You've done this before, it's easy for you. She said it like I hadn't once cried in a closet because Annie wouldn't sleep. Like I hadn't spent nights rocking Eli through fevered dreams. Still, I agreed. Because saying no would have felt like setting a house on fire with my kids still inside. The first night, I stayed up with Emery while Ashley slept soundly in the guest room. Her room now, apparently. The baby cried every 90 minutes. I soothed her, sang softly, rocked her through hiccups. I remembered how it felt when Eli was that small, the terrifying intimacy of keeping someone alive through sheer will. At 4 a.m., I stumbled into the kitchen for water and found Dad at the counter. She keeping you up too? He asked. I nodded, too tired to explain. He poured coffee into a mug and pushed it toward me. Ashley's lucky to have your help. It was the kindest thing he'd said in weeks. But still no offer to help, no question of fairness, just compliance. By the 5th day, things shifted again. Dinner had just ended. The kids were playing with Legos in the corner. I bent down to sweep up spilled peas under the table when I heard it. Annie, use your inside voice. The baby's sleeping. It was Mom. Annie frowned. I wasn't being loud. You were, Ashley chimed in, sipping her tea on the couch. Let's be respectful, okay? Eli whispered. Can we watch a movie now? Ashley sighed. Not tonight, the baby needs quiet. It was barely 7 p.m. I opened my mouth, closed it. Later, I pulled Mom aside in the laundry room. The kids are having a hard time. They've been so quiet all week. They're just adjusting, she said, folding towels briskly. Ashley's going through a lot. So are Eli and Annie, I said, voice trembling. They just lost their dad. They need laughter, noise, some normalcy. Mom looked up, expression unreadable. Don't make this about you. My jaw locked. It's not about me, it's about them. She shook her head, dismissing me with that mother-knows-best tone that used to comfort me. Now it stung. Ashley needs support right now. Don't be selfish. Selfish. The word hit like a slap. I walked out without replying. If I stayed, I might say something I couldn't undo. That night, Eli climbed into my lap while I was folding laundry in our room. He was too big now, lanky and growing fast, but he still fit barely. Mom, he asked. Did we do something bad? I blinked. What? Everyone's mad when we talk. Annie said Grandma told her to go outside if she wants to sing. My throat tightened. No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. He nodded, quiet, then whispered, I miss Daddy loud. He always played music. I held him tighter. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. We weren't guests anymore. We were afterthoughts. I waited 2 more days. 2 more days of tiptoes and hushed cartoons. 2 more days of watching my children contort themselves into silence like that was the price of living here. 2 more days of suppressing every gut instinct just to keep the peace. Then I knocked on the laundry room door. Mom was ironing Ashley's robe, something silk and floral, still tagged from a boutique downtown. She looked up, mildly startled, then smiled like nothing was wrong. Need something. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. My heart was pounding like I'd committed a crime. I was hoping we could talk. Of course. She didn't stop ironing. I cleared my throat. I've noticed Eli and Annie are being told to quiet down a lot. They're starting to think they're doing something wrong by just being kids. Mom exhaled slowly. Jenna, you know how delicate babies are. Any loud noise can wake Emery. I understand that, but they're children, and this isn't a library, it's their home too. She paused, finally setting the iron down. Jenna, Ashley just gave birth. She's recovering. Emery needs a calm environment. You know what it's like those first few weeks. Yes, I said. I do, which is why I know how easy it is to forget what everyone else is going through. She tilted her head slightly as if I'd said something odd. What are you trying to say? I hesitated, then said it plainly. My kids just lost their father. I know Ashley's adjusting, but Eli and Annie are grieving. They need space to laugh, to cry, to be loud without feeling like a burden. Mom's smile thinned just slightly. Jenna, don't make this a competition. It's not, I said too quickly, but it was already too late. Her eyes hardened. You think I don't care about them? She asked, arms folding. I think maybe you haven't noticed how often they get asked to leave the room, or how often I'm cleaning up after everyone else while Ashley sleeps until noon. She's recovering. So was I said, softer now. But no one offered me extra rest when Evan passed. No one made my children whisper while I cried in the kitchen. A long silence settled between us. She looked past me, her gaze fixed on the hallway. Ashley's under a lot of pressure. Daniel's working full-time and she's breastfeeding exclusively. She doesn't have help. I'm help, I said. I've been helping every night, every bottle, every diaper. Mom flinched. That's not fair. I tried to soften. I'm not trying to attack her or you. I just want to make sure Eli and Annie don't feel like they're intruding. I want them to feel like they matter. She pressed her lips together, then reached for the iron again. I think you're tired, Jenna, maybe overwhelmed. I am, I admitted. But I'm also aware, and I'm watching my children slowly shrink. She didn't respond. So I turned, opened the door, and stepped out. I didn't slam it. I didn't cry. But as I passed the kitchen, I saw Ashley holding Emery with one hand while scrolling her phone with the other. Eli was on the couch, staring blankly at the muted TV. Annie sat beside him with her arms crossed tight over her chest. Annie, Ashley said without looking up, can you move over? You're too close to the baby. Annie's eyes met mine. Wide, confused, I walked over and gently picked her up. Come on, sweetheart, let's go draw. Ashley didn't even glance up. That night I wrote it all down. Every time Ashley dismissed them. Every time Mom brushed off my concerns. Every sigh from Dad. Every moment I noticed my children flinching when someone raised their voice, not out of fear, but shame. I wasn't writing it to share. I was writing it because I needed a record. Proof that I wasn't imagining it. That this wasn't just grief clouding my mind. Later, when the house was quiet, I peeked into the kids' room. Annie had fallen asleep with her arms wrapped around Eli. His hand rested protectively on her back. My babies. They were all I had left. And I wouldn't let them disappear in someone else's story. It started with a sign. Ashley taped it to the kitchen wall one Saturday morning, right between the calendar and the corkboard full of grocery coupons. Nap schedule, Emery sleeps 12 p.m., 3 p.m. daily. Please keep noise to a minimum. No TV, no vacuuming, no loud play. Thank you for respecting our peace. Our peace. The words hit like a breath I hadn't meant to hold. My peace had never gotten a sign. Neither had my children's. Eli noticed first. Mom, he whispered, pointing to the taped paper. Does that mean we can't watch cartoons? I bent down beside him. It means we'll find other things to do during those hours, okay? He nodded, already defeated. By the next week, the rules expanded. Ashley printed them this time. Laminated them, too. Baby quiet hours, 9 a.m., 10:30 a.m., and 12 p.m., 3 p.m. No shouting, singing, or banging. Screen time should be kept low. If you must speak, do so softly. Thank you for understanding. Mom posted it on the fridge like it was a family announcement. I stood there staring at it, unsure whether to laugh or scream. Instead, I did neither. I packed a coloring book and a quiet snack into a bag and told the kids we were going to the park. Fresh air, space, a place where they could shout without being shushed. Ashley didn't even look up from her tablet as we left. The shift happened slowly. And then all at once, the kids weren't allowed in the living room anymore. Too many small pieces, Ashley said of their Legos. They weren't welcome at the table during Emery's feedings. Too distracting. And worst of all, their laughter began to fade. Not because they had nothing to laugh about, but because they were learning not to laugh here. One afternoon, I came home from work and found Eli and Annie sitting silently on the floor of my childhood bedroom. The Legos were packed away in a box. They weren't reading, or drawing, or playing, just sitting. "Why are the lights off?" I asked gently. "Baby's sleeping," Annie whispered. "Grandma said we had to be quiet." I sat down beside them, throat tightening. "Did you eat lunch?" Annie shrugged. Eli looked away. Later, I found out they'd eaten cold PBJs in the hallway. Ashley was napping. Mom didn't want them bothering the baby. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling fan blades, counting them, watching the slow whirl. My stomach twisted, not from hunger but from helplessness. This wasn't a temporary rough patch. This was the new reality. The house had reordered itself around Ashley, and we had become the clutter. I started picking up more shifts at the local clinic. At first, it was for the money, but then it became something else. A reason to be gone. A reason not to watch my kids tiptoe around their own grief. Not to feel the silence that had grown thick and immovable. Not to answer Ashley's texts that read, "Can you pick up formula on your way home? You owe us another week of help." Every evening, I'd return just past bedtime, just in time to kiss foreheads and say, "Tomorrow we'll read a story," knowing tomorrow I'd miss bedtime again. I'd walk through the door, drop my purse, and find the living room spotless, the kitchen humming quietly, and my children already waiting for me, sitting up in bed like shadows. "Hi, Mommy," Eli would whisper. "I missed you," Annie would say every time. I missed them too. But more than that, I missed the us we used to be. The noisy, messy, wildly alive version of this little family. The one that existed before all this polite suffocation. One night, Annie crawled into my lap while I was sorting laundry. "Why does Aunt Ashley not like us?" My arms froze around a balled-up shirt. "Sweetheart, she always tells us to move or be quiet or go play somewhere else. She's tired. Having a new baby is hard." Annie frowned. "But when you were tired, Daddy let us sit with you on the couch. We didn't have to be quiet." I looked at her. This small, brilliant girl who could already sense when something was off, even if she didn't have the words yet. "She's not the same as me," I said finally. "But that doesn't mean it's your fault." She nodded slowly. "I think she thinks we're loud." I smiled, though my chest ached. "I like when you're loud." I started writing again. Late at night, when the house finally quieted for me, I'd sit on the edge of my bed and pour it all into the notebook tucked under the mattress. Not complaints, truths. Monday, Ashley asked me to buy groceries. No offer to reimburse me. Wednesday, Eli said he didn't want to talk at dinner. He was afraid it would wake the baby. Friday, Mom scolded Annie for laughing too loud. She didn't even smile afterward. It wasn't a journal. It was evidence. Not for court, not for Ashley, but for me. So that one day when I started questioning my memory, when someone inevitably said, "You're overreacting," I could read these pages and remember I wasn't. I was there. One evening, I returned from work to find the kids already in pajamas, sitting silently on their bed again. They didn't even jump up when they saw me. I knelt down beside them. "Did you have dinner?" "Grandpa said we could eat the leftover chicken if we were quiet," Eli mumbled. "And did you?" He nodded. "I made Annie's plate." I looked at my son, only 5, and something broke. They were raising each other in a house full of adults, and no one else seemed to notice. It happened again. I came home late from the clinic, the same slow creak of the door, the familiar scent of leftover casserole still hanging in the air. Eli and Annie were waiting in our bedroom, sitting on the bed with their backs against the wall like little sentries. They didn't even say hi this time. They just leaned into me the second I walked in. No words, just warmth, just need. I sank down between them and pulled the covers over us, even though I was still wearing my scrubs. Annie curled into my side. Eli clutched the hem of my shirt. They didn't fall asleep for hours. The next morning, I made pancakes. Real ones, with vanilla and cinnamon the way Evan used to make them. I woke the kids with a whispered promise. "No rules today. We're going somewhere no one will shush us." We ended up at the duck pond near the library. It was small and not much to look at, but it was ours. Annie chased a goose that hissed back at her, and Eli invented a game where he could only walk on the cracks in the sidewalk. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. For the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of them again. Not just quiet, well-behaved house guests. My children alive, bright, real. That night after they fell asleep, I sat on the edge of my bed with Evan's photo in my hand. It had started to fade a little, the corner curling, the ink softening at the edges. I stared at his face and whispered what I hadn't let myself say in weeks. I don't know what I'm doing. I used to think grief was loud, screaming, breaking plates, sobbing in public restrooms. But that wasn't my version. My grief was silent. It was the sound of my daughter asking permission to laugh. It was my son waiting until everyone else was asleep to tell me he missed his dad. It was folding laundry no one thanked me for, buying groceries with money I didn't have, doing favors for people who didn't notice what I was losing in the process. But worse than all of it was the guilt, because I said yes to all of it. I let it happen, not because I was weak, but because I was trying to hold a sinking ship together with my bare hands. I thought if I was agreeable enough, accommodating enough, quiet enough, maybe they'd make room for my children too. They didn't. I made a decision that night. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just a small, defiant step in a different direction. The next day, I walked to the community center near the clinic during my lunch break and signed up for the Tuesday night support group. It was listed as Healing After Loss. 12 chairs in a circle, coffee that tasted like cardboard, and an old bulletin board with notes like, "Your grief is your own pace." The first night, I didn't speak. I just listened. A man talked about losing his wife after a car accident. A woman shared how her adult son hadn't called in 2 years since the funeral. Someone else read a poem. It wasn't much, but it was the first time in months I felt like I wasn't drowning alone. I also started journaling, not just observations or dates, but truths. I didn't hold back. I feel invisible in this house. My children are shrinking because I keep choosing to stay silent. I'm not okay, and I'm tired of pretending I am. Sometimes I wrote letters to Evan, things I wish I'd said before the hospital, regrets, fears, even petty things like how I hated the way Ashley left baby bottles in the sink for me to clean. The words poured out like poison I didn't know I'd swallowed. It didn't fix anything, but it made me feel less trapped in my own mind. One evening after therapy group, I came home to find Eli and Annie sitting on the back porch. It was past bedtime. "What are you doing out here?" I asked softly. Eli looked up. The baby was crying again. Grandpa said to go outside till she stopped. My heart clenched. "You were out here alone," Annie shrugged. "It's okay. We counted stars." They scooted over so I could sit between them. The night air was cool, the sky hazy with the glow of distant porch lights. Eli whispered, "Do you think Daddy can see the stars too?" I nodded, my throat thick. "I think he sees you." Annie took my hand. "I miss when we were home." "Me too, baby," but I didn't say it out loud. I just held her tighter. Later, when the house was finally quiet, I opened my journal again. This time, I didn't write about what Ashley said or how Mom brushed me off. I wrote a question, a big one. What would it look like to leave? Not out of spite, not out of rage, but out of protection, out of clarity, out of love for 2 small children who deserved more than laminated quiet hours and leftover chicken in the hallway. I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing: the question was no longer terrifying. It was beginning to feel like hope. The voicemail was short, unassuming, almost forgettable. "Hi, Ms. Rains. This is Charles Bennett, your late husband's attorney. I'd like to discuss a few details about Mr. Rains's estate. Give me a call when you have a moment." I stood in the clinic's break room, holding my phone like it had just turned into something sacred. Charles Bennett. I remembered the name. He was polite, soft-spoken. He always wore boaties and smelled like peppermint. Evan met with him a few times after the first diagnosis, but I hadn't thought much of it. We were focused on survival, not legacy. I called back on my walk to the car. Answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Rains, thank you for calling." His voice was gentle, kind. The way people speak when they're about to shift your entire world without raising their tone. "I'll get right to the point," he said. "There's a matter regarding your parents' property that I need to clarify." I blinked. "My parents' house?" "Yes. During our estate planning sessions, Evan shared that he contributed to paying off a substantial portion of their mortgage." I leaned against the hood of my car. "Wait, what?" "It was part of a long-term security plan for you and the children. He wanted to ensure you'd always have a place to go, something safe, something permanent." I felt the air leave my lungs. "But it's their house," I said, more to myself than him. "It was, Evan structured the payments through a trust, and those documents now allow for full property rights to be transferred if you choose to pursue them. I could barely form words. You mean I legally own it? With court proceedings, yes. You need to formally assert your rights, but the foundation is already in place. Evan made sure of that. Silence stretched out. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. My mind raced backward through months of being treated like a guest, a nuisance, an afterthought. All this time I'd been living in a house that belonged to me, and they knew nothing about it. Why didn't he tell me? I whispered. Mr. Bennett paused. He wanted to, but near the end he said it was too much at once. He figured he'd write you a letter. I felt tears prick my eyes. There was no letter. I'm sorry. I stood there for a long time after we ended the call, keys forgotten in my hand, wind curling through my jacket like a whisper. Evan, he'd known. He'd seen the writing on the wall long before I did. And he didn't just hope I'd be okay, he made a plan. A quiet, protective, radical kind of love. I didn't tell anyone that night. Not the kids, not my parents, not Ashley. I just came home, kissed Eli and Annie goodnight, and stood for a long time in the hallway, watching the shadows stretch across the framed photos on the wall. Pictures of Ashley's baby shower. A family cruise I'd never been invited to. A Christmas portrait taken while Evan was in the hospital and the kids and I were too sick to attend. A house full of memories that barely included us. And yet, he'd given it to me. Later that night, I pulled out the paperwork Mr. Bennett emailed. I read every line twice. It wasn't just technical jargon. It was proof. Evan had paid off 73% of the remaining balance using insurance disbursements and savings I didn't even know he still had access to. He'd done it while he was sick, while he could barely stand, while I was busy keeping the lights on. And he'd never said a word, because he knew. He knew what this house would become. He knew how Ashley would shift the air, how my parents would choose convenience over justice, how I'd shrink myself until my kids followed. He knew I'd need a way out, and he gave me one, but this wasn't just an exit door. This was leverage, legal, binding, quietly powerful. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel helpless. I felt chosen, not by them, by him. I came home earlier than usual. Mr. Bennett had started drafting the court petition. His tone was professional, but I could hear the steel under it, measured, confident, airtight. He'd walk me through every step. "They won't see it coming," he said, and I'd nearly smiled. It felt strange to have something like justice sitting on my phone in an email. I stopped at the bakery on the way home, 2 apple fritters, Eli's favorite, a small bag of jelly beans for Annie. I wanted to celebrate, even if just quietly, even if it was just between us. But the house was too quiet when I walked in. No cartoon music, no laughter, no clink of Legos on tile. Just the hum of the fridge and the distant squeak of Ashley's voice on a phone call. I found them in the hallway. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes red. Annie was beside him, cradling something in her lap, a plush turtle Evan had won for her at the state fair 3 years ago. Its head was ripped, the stuffing limp like something deflated from the inside. I dropped the fritters. "Annie, what happened?" I knelt beside them. She didn't answer. Her lower lip trembled. Eli spoke, voice small and flat. "Grandpa said he sold our toys." I stared at him, not comprehending. "What?" "He said they were too noisy," Annie whispered. "He put them in boxes. We watched from the window. A lady came and gave him money." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. "Which toys?" I asked. Eli pointed toward the garage. "My rocket launcher, Annie's tea set, the truck from Daddy, all gone." I stood up, shaking. My hands curled into fists without meaning to. I stormed into the garage, empty bins, shelves cleared. A few price tags still fluttering from a box in the corner. The silence was so loud I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I turned and marched back inside. Ashley was in the den, scrolling on her phone while Emery slept nearby in a bassinet. "Where's Dad?" I asked, my voice low. She looked up lazily. "He's on the porch. What's the crisis now?" I didn't respond. I stepped outside. Dad sat in his usual chair, a can of soda sweating beside him. He didn't even look surprised. "Did you sell my children's toys?" He didn't blink. "They were cluttering the place." I stared at him. "They weren't yours to touch. They left them everywhere. We asked them to keep things quiet. You never listened." "They're grieving," I hissed. "They're children. You don't sell a 5-year-old's toys because you're inconvenienced." He stood slow, like he was the one offended. "This is our house, Jenna. You don't get to come back here and run things like you own the place." I felt something snap. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the email from Mr. Bennett. "You might want to read this," I said, voice steady. Turns out I do own the place. His face didn't register it, not right away. So I added, Evan paid off this mortgage, quietly, carefully. Legally, he left the house to me. The silence that followed was cavernous. Dad's mouth opened. Closed, I turned, walked inside, and didn't look back. That night I packed. No fights. No speeches. Just the essentials: pajamas, toothbrushes, Annie's turtle, what was left of Eli's art supplies. I moved like I was evacuating a burning building. Fast, focused. Numb, I didn't even cry. The kids watched from the bed, not asking why. Because they already knew. Marissa opened her door before I even knocked. She was barefoot, wearing old leggings and a loose t-shirt, her face bare and warm and real. One look at us and she said, "You're staying as long as you need." The kids ran to the couch without hesitation. I stood there in the doorway, bag on my shoulder, a whole house behind me that no longer felt like home. Marissa pulled me into a hug, and that's when I finally cried. Not for Evan, not even for the toys, but for everything I'd allowed, for how far I'd let it go, for how long I'd mistaken survival for strength. That night, while Eli and Annie curled up in their borrowed beds and Marissa folded extra towels, I sat at her kitchen table and emailed Mr. Bennett back. Move forward, file everything. The house would come, the courtroom would come, but that wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that my children would never again wonder if they were too much. What mattered was that we were out, and I would never go back. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the forced, eggshell silence of Ashley's nap hours or the hushed tension of walking on emotional minefields. This was a gentle kind of quiet, the kind you don't realize you've been missing until it wraps around you like sunlight. Marissa's guest room had 2 twin beds and a threadbare rug with dancing bears on it. There were books stacked on the windowsill, a lava lamp that flickered unevenly, and a small poster that read, "Kindness is contagious." It wasn't fancy. It wasn't large, but it was ours. For now, that morning I made French toast with powdered sugar and strawberry slices, the kind Evan used to make on birthdays. Eli looked up mid-bite. "Can we laugh here?" Marissa snorted from the coffee pot. "Kiddo, you better. If you don't, I'll make you mop the kitchen." He grinned, full and unguarded. Annie giggled with syrup on her chin, and I just watched them, shoulders relaxed, eyes clear. It had only been 2 days, 2 days outside the house that drained us, and already I could see them beginning to bloom. Later, I helped them set up puzzles in the living room while Marissa worked from her laptop. She had no rules about volume, no laminated schedules, just warmth and try not to step on the cat. It was the kind of family rhythm I didn't realize I'd been starving for. After lunch, Marissa poured me a second cup of coffee and asked, "How are you really?" I hesitated, then said, "Like I've been underwater for months and just now remembered how to breathe." She nodded. "You stayed longer than I would have." I shrugged. "I stayed longer than I should have." "No," she said. "You stayed until you were strong enough to leave on your own terms. That matters." I didn't answer, but I felt something shift in my chest, something like grace, something I hadn't allowed myself in a very long time. That afternoon, Mr. Bennett called again. He'd filed the petition. I expected nerves, panic, dread, but all I felt was calm, not because I wanted revenge, but because I was finally ready to claim what was mine, not for status or pride or payback, for peace, for Eli and Annie, for Evan, who'd made sure I had the tools, even if I didn't find them until late. That night, I stood in the doorway of the guest room and watched my kids sleep. Eli had kicked off his blanket. Annie had tangled her arms around her stuffed turtle like it still held magic. I wanted to hold on to that moment forever, the simplicity of it, the proof that you don't need the perfect house or perfect furniture or a pristine routine to feel safe. You just need love and space to be yourself without fear. I whispered into the dark, "I promise. This time I won't wait until it's too late." Over the next few days, things began moving. The court scheduled the hearing. Mr. Bennett prepared the documents for property transfer. Ashley, Mom, and Dad hadn't responded yet, not officially, but I knew the moment was coming. That moment when the illusion they'd clung to the house, the control, the rewriting of what was fair would crumble. And they'd realize I hadn't disappeared, I'd simply stopped apologizing. One evening after dinner, Marissa and I sat on the back patio while the kids chased fireflies. "You gonna tell them?" she asked. I sipped my tea. "That I own the house?" "No, that you're about to take it back." I smiled. "Eventually. When it's done. Not worried they'll come after you." I shook my head. They don't know who I am anymore." She raised an eyebrow. "And who's that?" "A woman who finally remembered she's allowed to fight for what's hers." Marissa grinned. "Took you long enough." The letter arrived on a Thursday. Not a phone call, not a family meeting, just a plain envelope with trembling penmanship and a San Antonio postmark. Inside, one page, from Mom. It didn't open with "Dear Jenna." No warmth, no apology. Just a list of accusations. "You've humiliated us. How dare you treat your own parents like this? Ashley is devastated." There was one sentence that stood out more than all the others. "We never would have treated you this way." I laughed, out loud, sharp and full and bitter, because they had, every day since I came home. Mr. Bennett met me at the courthouse for the final signing. The judge's voice was flat but formal, the ruling clear. "The house is legally yours, effective immediately." I didn't feel I felt settled, like a storm had finally run out of thunder. A few days later, I walked through the front door of the house for the last time, keys in my hand, papers in my purse, purpose in every step. No one was home. Ashley's diaper bag sat by the stairs. Dad's coffee mug was still half full on the counter. The smell of Emery's baby wipes lingered in the nursery. I didn't pause. I walked straight to the kitchen table and left 3 envelopes, addressed in tidy handwriting. One for Dad, one for Mom, one for Ashley, each with the same message. "You have 30 days to vacate the property. I've covered rent for a 1-bedroom apartment nearby for 1 month. After that, you're on your own." I didn't sign them with love. I didn't sign them at all. The family group chat lit up 3 hours later. "Ashley, what is this? Are you serious?" "Mom, how could you do this to your own family?" "Dad, we took you in when you had nothing." I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. And I typed exactly what needed to be said. "You didn't take me in. Evan did, with his money, with his planning, and with more grace than any of you showed my children. I've rented you a place. You have 1 month. I suggest you use it." I muted the chat. And just like that, the noise stopped. We moved in 2 weeks later. A quiet 2-bedroom home on the edge of a neighborhood filled with bicycles and chalk drawings on the sidewalks. The backyard was wild and overgrown, but the kids didn't care. They ran barefoot through the grass like it had been waiting just for them. I watched from the porch, coffee in hand, heart in my throat. Not everything was perfect. Bills still needed paying. Grief still came at strange hours like a knock from a past life. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something that stretched deeper than relief. I felt free. That night, I tucked Eli in and found one of his drawings on the pillow beside him. It was our new house. Stick figures in the yard. A giant sun. The word "home" scribbled in the corner in shaky red crayon. Annie ran up behind me, clutching her turtle. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" "Every Saturday," I said. "That's our new rule." She squealed and ran off, already shouting for syrup. After they were asleep, I sat down with Evan's photo again. But this time, I didn't whisper questions or regrets. I just looked at him, really looked. And I said, "You knew what I'd need, and you gave it to me before I even asked." I could almost hear his reply. "Of course I did." The next morning, we made pancakes. Annie sang loudly. Eli danced on a chair. No one told them to be quiet, and I just stood there, laughing through tears, watching sunlight pour in through windows that were finally ours. Have you ever had to walk through fire to find your peace? Have you ever had to choose your children's safety over someone else's comfort? That moment when you finally draw the line, it isn't rage. It's relief. If this story resonated, share your thoughts below. And remember, you are not selfish for leaving a place where love had conditions. You are brave for saving yourself and your children anyway. And you are not alone.